Okay, so we're live now. So, all right, everybody, welcome. This is Dr. Sean Orr and Dr. Drew Edwards. This is our 11th Braincast podcast for the Neurogenesis Project. And there are some timely events in the news this week. We wanted to come and drop in here and touch base with our audience since some of this might be a little triggering of what's going on. Don't you think, Drew?
I do. A couple, the thing with the Reiner family is particularly troubling and controversial. And so we want to be sensitive to that, but I think it's worth discussing from our perspective as people who work with people with brain failure, brain dysfunction, addiction, and their families.
Yeah. What were your first thoughts when you heard the story?
It was just sad, and I of course everyone knew who Rob Reiner is, and he was a very talented director, film producer. His father, Carl Reiner, was really famous. Dick Van Dyke Show, that was him. And when I heard about their son being accused of murdering his parents, and then I read about he'd been in treatment at least 12 times and been homeless because he didn't get sober. It reminded me of a lot of some of the patients we've worked with. And as a forensic expert who testifies in murder cases where there's drugs involved, it did hit home for me.
Yeah, I thought it would. And, what really came to my mind is, a feeling of compassion for the family members of our patients. I can't imagine. It's difficult to have a son or a daughter, a loved one who's struggling with addiction. There's so many nuances, and you've really helped me to understand that, the family struggles right there with the person who's addicted. But then to have, something so dramatic and catastrophic as allegedly a son. And again, everything here is alleged. Nothing's been proved in the court of law, and I'm sure we're going to learn more as this unfolds. But as it stands now, on December 17th, 2025, the son, Nick, has been arrested, and I believe he's been.
He was arraigned yesterday and charged. I've probably been called to do an expert witness, and people who were addicts and who in the commission of a felony, usually trying to get money or rob somebody, killed an individual. And so I've probably sat for 5 hours with each one of these people in death row because they've been convicted of first-degree murder. And the question is the sentencing, the penalty phase. In Florida, do they get the death penalty or life without parole? And I guess that's the question in California right now. He could get either one of those if in fact he's convicted of that.
So there are different stages, and maybe this would be helpful for our audience to know. And then after we talk about that, I want to get more into the family dynamics, if that's okay with you. But when somebody's arrested and accused of murder, they're arraigned, then they go through trial, and let's say they are found guilty. How do you, especially on these capital cases, Drew, how do you come in and interface with the courts and with the person who's the accused and the family members or the other victims, survivors, if there are any?
Probably when DNA evidence began to be used, and they had found that several people had been wrongly accused and convicted and were in prison, the courts now re-examine everybody who's on death row or who has received a death penalty. But so I get some of those ones that are maybe 10 years old, but the ones that are happening, like in this case, I'll be called in after the conviction, and then there's another trial on the penalty. And my job is to explain to the court what effect, if any, did the person's drug addiction or state of mind, mental health have to do with the commission of felony murder. And my job is just to educate the court. I don't pick sides. I'm not pro or against I'm just, it's a good system to let the jury of your peers hear the evidence and make that decision. Oddly enough, uh, about a third of the people I see are hoping for the death penalty. And I asked them why. They said, because the execution won't happen for at least 15 years, and you're on death row, which is a much nicer environment and experience than the general population. And they'll tell me you may not live 2 years in general population in some cases, because it's pretty rough in prison. But I get to know these people, and out of all of them, there's only been one that was a psychopath. He would have murdered anybody for anything. The rest of them, I could honestly say, had it not been for the addiction, that murder would not have happened. Now, that doesn't mean they're innocent. They're not. They committed the crime. And the law states, for example, if you're hungry and you steal, you're still guilty of stealing. In the penalty phase, they look at mitigating factors. I'm hungry. Aggregating factors. I did something really crazy or vile to the person, and that the jury weighs that in the sentence.
So you shared some of the cases that you worked on with me. For our audience, I suppose it could be easy for somebody to say, well, look, you're just trying to get somebody off the hook, or, this person, they did the crime, so they should do the time. Obviously, we're very much about accountability in our practice, and
yes,
talk about that in a few minutes. But so how do you, how do you feel when you're interviewing somebody who's committed a heinous crime, but then as you're going through the interview, you start to stack up all of the, let's say, adverse childhood events that they went through, and brain injuries and the damaging effects of substances on their brain. And I would imagine that probably has an impact on the way that you view this person and maybe even their crime.
Well, try to follow the science on this. I mean, there's now, because of the neuroimaging that's available to us now to see the brain, and we can see subtle things that you couldn't see 20 years ago. And so, and unfortunately, many of these people do not have any imaging of their brain after they've been convicted. And it's very hard to get the court to do that. But when we can do that, we can see evidence of really brain failure, as we're calling this. You have heart failure, kidney failure, lung failure. We have brain failure. All depression, addiction, ADHD, these are part of brain failure. That organ isn't working as it is designed to do. Some of that is genetic, some of that is environmental exposure. There's 100 things that can change the way your brain operates. And back to your question about adverse childhood experiences, we all have had some, and it's relative. But I have seen probably half of the cases where I come away from hearing these stories and I can't imagine they survived their childhood. Being not to be graphic, but being raped since they were 7 years old by a grandfather with the permission of the mother, and living like that and somehow surviving. And I hear these stories and I feel mercy. I feel compassion for them. What they did was wrong, but the brain's not operating correctly when you're on drugs and you have that experience. That's a very toxic combination that's going to combust or explode. And usually we see, horrible results when that happens. And it's very difficult to know what to do.
Well, it's interesting that you bring up the idea of mercy. We just looked at an interview not long ago. We could put that up here later, of Rob Reiner being interviewed after Charlie Kirk's assassination.
Yes.
And how he was absolutely horrified and, just felt like nobody deserved that kind of treatment. And so now here he's, unfortunately been subjected to his own version of horrible treatment. So I think that we do see this a lot with their families of people that we take care of with addiction problems, that they've developed compassion fatigue. They have no more mercy to give. They almost don't care anymore. You want to talk a little bit about that, about compassion fatigue?
Yeah. I've seen a couple of the interviews of Rob Reiner talking with his son, in 2016 is when he got off the streets and came back. And I'm sure he was advised to kick him out after 12 treatments and probably millions of dollars spent on this. Not that money's the biggest deal, but and they seem to have a reconciliation. And the son talked about not being close and all those things, and they seem to have worked that out. I think after seeing that and hearing what Rob Reiner said about Charlie Kirk, he's a very compassionate man. I mean, he cared deeply about that. I don't think he's a man who wants anybody to suffer. And what he must have gone through with his own son, as parents, you grow another heart for each child you have, and your job is to protect them. And when they're addicted and you have to make a decision to kick them out, it's the most gut-wrenching thing possible because they have to live with the consequences of that. Your kid could die. And so coaching our patients and families through this is hard. But it's a deadly disease. People have to understand that addiction is not a choice any more than having type 1 diabetes is a choice. You're born with something like that. The things that happen to the brain in life and in utero and all these things, the genetics conspire, and we see brain failure. And it often, from adverse childhood experience, we know that by the time they're teenagers, about 90% of these kids are using drugs at age 13 because there's no joy in their life, and drugs bring them some joy. And so you can understand that on a compassionate level, they don't see the destruction that's doing to their life. And that's the paradox of addiction. They want to feel better, but the more they go to feel better, the worse their life becomes.
Yeah, this is the ultimate irony, is that if you have kidney failure, you stop producing urine, you need to get dialyzed. If you have heart failure, you can't pump blood properly, water backs up in your lungs and your feet, you need to have diuretics to reduce the volume in your bloodstream. People don't really think about brain failure, but it is really those lapses of judgment, the brain fog, the loss of self-awareness, and really that's a big core teaching in our practices. The blindness to the blind spots, right? The lack of awareness of one's own lack of awareness, which we call anosognosia. It's really kind of a crippling common finding in our patients that we're taking care of. And
yes,
that concept really resonates with their families when we talk about it, right? If they could just shake them and help their loved one, their brother or their sister see, what damage they're doing.
Yeah, why can't they see what they're doing? And the truth is, they can't.
Yeah.
Their life becomes narrowly focused around getting high. So the addiction isn't to the drug per se, it's to changing your brain. It's to changing the mood temporarily. But the more you do that, the less of those mood changing chemicals you produce. So it's a up, down, up and down. And families don't understand it, but it's not a choice. Who would choose that for a life, to be a drug addict? Nobody. They start at teenagers because they want to have a good time. That's it. We all did stuff like that. So yeah, the judgment around these things is something else we have to deal with.
So if you wanted to, send a message to the family members of people that we're taking care of right now, or other folks out there who maybe suddenly they're nervous, right? Like, I think even the Reiners were interviewed at one point about, being terrified of one day the worst coming to pass. Yes. And I think they probably thought the worst coming to pass would be that their son would die. I don't know if they were afraid for their own lives or not, but I know that we've taken care of families who feel that way.
Yes.
How should we comfort them or
we tell them there's some things you can do that may help, and some things that will make it worse. We try to tell them there's some things you can do that may help, but ultimately you can't make them better. So here's what we know. Here's what the science will tell us will be helpful, and the rest we give it to God. In a lot of our our patients start to understand that they can't control this. And nobody wanted this outcome in the Reiner family. They wanted their son back,
Mm-hmm.
and as they all do, and they're devastated. And to our patients, we often get to if after failed treatments, we get to the conversation about kicking them out. And I'm always careful, and we've talked about this. We don't have to live with the consequence of what they do if they kick them out. And I tell them, can you live if your kid doesn't make it? If he dies on the streets, can you kicked him out? Can you live with that? And they have to think about that. But some of them are so beat down. I think after 12 treatments,
Mm-hmm.
what else can I do?
Mm-hmm.
And having an addict in the house is like having the Tasmanian devil in your house. There's no peace, there's no quiet, there's no calm, there's no sanctuary. It's just tension and anger and anxiety.
Mm-hmm.
And after years, no one can live like that anymore.
Yeah.
And so you change the environment and you ask that person to leave and say, when you get better and you want help, come back. We love you. And that's what we do.
Well, compassion fatigue and caregiver burnout are real things, and
They are.
probably half, I think, since we've been doing this together, half of our work is surrounding those issues and helping to fortify family members, develop strategies that help them to set better boundaries and just reclaim their own lives. And we've been working on.
Sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
No, you're right. Finish that about the boundaries.
Well, I was going to say, I think we've been noodling around this concept of rescue from rehab. We see so many people who have been through the rehab revolving door, as you call it, who don't seem like they're transformed by the process. Maybe they've been babysat for a month, at an exorbitant cost and a nice, beautiful resort style location, but then they're back to where they were before they started and no better for it.
The data will tells us there's about an 80% relapse rate within 6 months. And this is after staying there for 3 or 4 months.
Yeah.
And I hate to say this because I remember when treatment worked back in the day, that's part of some of these big for-profit, that's their design. They want relapse to get the person back to the resort. And it's a nice place to be for 40, 50 days. And some people do that. And that's a shame. That is unethical. And we should confront this. Treatment is very important. It's a life and death disease, and it needs to be addressed that way. And the current system has failed.
Yeah.
Most of the people.
Well, in my opinion, people need to be transformed by the care that they're receiving, or else it's really not meaningful care. And I think this idea of rescue from rehab is an exciting concept, and hopefully it catches on.
So we believe, let me explain that, because we believe that we recognize that addiction is a brain disease, but nobody treats the brain. They will say we treat the brain, and what we began doing is treating the brain first. We do really good testing. We have targets. We see damage. We treat that, and instead of having their brain come back online in 6 months, we see them come back online in a month, and they're starting to think, and they can process what you should do in rehab that your frontal brain won't allow you to do because of the damage of the toxicity of the chemicals you've been putting in there. Alcohol is a solvent. Think about that. Mm-hmm. You put living tissue in a solvent, it dies. Yep. And we got to, as a culture, begin to think about this differently.
Well, I've been really doing a deep dive on exactly the neurobiology behind that. We'll come up with another talk about that down the road. But it's it's interesting to note that it is the neurons in the far frontal lobe, which are called the von Economou neurons or spindle neurons, that are really responsible for our ability to connect with other people and understand social cues, understand the impact of our behavior on other people. Mm-hmm. And don't you think it's a common theme for us to see somebody who's coming out of a long period of addiction and substance or alcohol use, that they really have lost a lot of that connection to their loved ones? They're they're almost like somebody who's had a brain injury, right? They're very self-focused, inwardly motivated. And what we're really trying to do is get those von Economo neurons that are left over to work again, so that you can get them to re-engage from a loving perspective with their community. And so
that's a good way to put it. I see them as sort of a person drowning and treading water, trying to just feel good enough each day to continue. And we know that the brain doesn't heal quickly. And we found some ways that can hasten that healing. Then they're ready for the emotional and the processing part of what they've done to their life. Another way I tell the patients, when you're addicted in early recovery, your headlights or your forethought go out about 1 week. You only see, how do I get my next high? Where responsible adults see way beyond the future and they envision a better future. Addicts don't do that, or they don't do it anymore. Their life is organized around getting the next feel good. And that's sad. But the good news is it's treatable if you get to the right folks,
Yeah, it is very gratifying to see those lights come on, in our patients. Like when they finally become self-aware enough that they can realize that they have some serious blind spots that they need to work on, it can be quite humbling, and sometimes a little sad for them to realize the damage that they've done. But at least that gives them a place to start from, right? To rebuild, repair.
I remember this kid, and he was probably 16. It took about 6 months. And finally, one day, he started crying. And we talked about this. He says, I hit my mom. I hit my mom. This happened way back. It finally hit him, what he had done. Emotionally, it connected. And he was so filled with horror and shame. I hit my mom. And he knew his mom loved him and he loved his mom, but the connection wasn't there yet. And as we know, those neural connections from the midbrain, the hedonic brain who wants what it wants, and the frontal brain that says, whoa, put the brakes on. That's why we see these impulsive crimes, because their inability. One addict told me.
Go back there just for a second, because we just lost your signal for a moment. So you're saying that's why we see these crimes, and
yes, their ability from their the midbrain, or the primitive brain, it's been called the reptile brain. It wants to eat, it wants to hydrate, it wants to procreate, and it wants to defend itself and fight. It doesn't think. And then we have this big cerebral cortex ending with the frontal cortex that no other animal has, where we can process that, say, no, I'm not going to hit you. I'm not going to call you names. I'm going to put the brakes on. And most mature adults wouldn't ever do any bad behavior they do. They're usually intoxicated when they do it, and they learn from that. Addicts don't learn from that. That's the difference. And then there's something different about their brains. So the inability to inhibit these primitive drives, which are often violent, doesn't exist in the addicted brain. That's brain failure at its worst.
It's interesting, going back to the Rob Reiner case, Mr. and Mrs. Reiner, both of them, unfortunately, were snuffed out. I don't know if you follow Dr. Todd Grande at all. He's
No.
I think he must have a forensic background. He's a psychiatrist, and he does really great analysis of crimes. And maybe he's somebody we should reach out to collaborate with. He's a very interesting guy who basically was critical of Rob Reiner for kind of throwing himself on the sword. But basically, according to Dr. Grande's analysis, Rob Reiner realized that all the therapists in rehab were wrong, that his son knew best how to deal with his addiction. This, I guess, spurned the movie that he filmed with him about addiction, wrote and filmed with him. And then it seemed like Rob probably was feeling guilty, maybe, or taking on responsibility for his son's actions, possibly. Dr. Grande was interestingly used very critical of Rob Reiner for that, for essentially enabling his son and empowering him over something that he shouldn't have been.
That happens a lot.
Yeah, tell me more. We see that with some of our family members.
It's guilt, and I haven't read a lot, but what I have read in the interviews with Nick, the son, who's allegedly murdered his parents, he talks about being treated unfairly and being, having not bonded with his dad. I never heard one time where he said, I messed up. I hurt people. Hey, maybe he did. I just haven't seen anything where he said, I did some really horrible things. So the father lovingly says, yeah, I'll take that, whether it's true or not, that's what loving fathers do sometimes. They don't want their kid to hurt and suffer. And it isn't helpful. It can be enabling, as you just pointed out. So that's why they need good guidance from people who know what they're doing here. And I don't think these big treatment centers are individualizing their treatment very well anymore. Everyone's different. Not everyone responds to the same thing. And if I sound critical of these centers, I am.
I think maybe that's appropriate from what we've been seeing. By the time people get to us, oftentimes they're in pretty bad shape, and they haven't got their money's worth. That's for
We'll
sure.
have a couple of them come on and talk some. That would be neat. Their own experience.
That's a good idea. Yeah.
So my heart goes out to the family and my prayers, and I hope our audience just has compassion for this family and for Nick. I don't believe he ever wanted to kill his parents. I think this was his brain failed him again, and this time the consequences are not reversible.
Yeah. Well, all right. Well, thanks. I think that's a great segue into the next topic that's in the news here, in terms of what might be reversible and what's not.
Yes.
Joe Burrow is making the news, quarterback of the Bengals. You brought this to my attention, and so some of our audience may know that I had the great pleasure of being the quarterback, or I beg your pardon, the neurologist for the Jacksonville Jaguars for a number of years, and I would help players who were suffering from concussion and other related injuries. Why don't you? We'll play a clip for the audience here in just a second, so they can see what we're talking about. But why don't you tell me what your thoughts are?
Well, I watched this interview with Joe Burrow, he's one of the best quarterbacks in the league. He's led the league in passing accuracy and percentage, and he'd been to the AFC Championship game, I think, twice in the last 4 or 5 years. And he's usually a team guy, an upbeat guy. He's not a grandiose human being. And this last press conference, it almost looked like he was tearing up as he was talking about they'd lost, and he just come back from a serious, what they call turf toe, which sounds not serious, but it's very serious. It's very painful. You can't play with this. And the rehab was several months. But at his press conference, he just looked sad, and he kind of looked lost. And it wasn't the usual guy we see. And he said he's not having any joy anymore. And there's a few questions, and he said something, well, as you know, I've been through a lot with I've had some injuries to my head and to my body, and that caught our eye.
The brain,
head injury.
Body, yeah.
And then I dug around, and he has been sacked, meaning he's been tackled trying to make a pass more than any other quarterback in the last 2 years. But he's also been knocked down and hit more than any other quarterback in recent memory. And he's a mobile guy usually. And I was reminded of a story you told me with the Jaguars, and you saw a very severely concussed quarterback who did not hit his head. Would you tell that story?
Yeah, it was interesting because if you looked at the game footage, he never actually touched his head anywhere. He landed hard on his shoulder, and after that was stunned and had the classic symptoms of concussion that lingered for about a good 2 weeks, during which I kept him out of play. My recommendation was to not go back into play, and it took a lot of heat because he didn't seem to contact his head, so people were really questioning the diagnosis. But you don't have to hit your head directly to have a concussion.
Right.
Landing hard on your tailbone or in your back or side can still send quite aggressive shock waves through the body to the brain, and create those torsional factors and the shearing forces that actually will damage neurons and cause the metabolic and structural abnormalities that we see with a head injury. So somebody who's been knocked down and sacked a lot of times, even if his head never directly contacted another helmet or hit the ground, could still have the cumulative effects of multiple sub-concussive hits and even
Hmm.
concussions. I think you told me that Joe Burrow had only been diagnosed with a concussion on 2 occasions. I don't know if that's accurate or not.
I don't know. I know that every NFL player has had multiple concussions. I mean, it's just my father played professionally for 1 year. I played, and I had some. It's just too violent of a game. It's designed for high speed collisions, right? Um, but I did look at some data, and I did a report that I wrote with a former player a couple of years ago when we presented it to the Jaguars and NFL about the health of retired players, and it's a disaster. The player, they suffer from depression and they suffer from all kinds of things that are related to football, and sometimes it's metabolic. Statistically, 100% of them are overweight, and a lot of them develop diabetes. Depression and substance abuse was ubiquitous among retired players,
Mm.
much higher compared to age-matched norms, meaning other men of their age who didn't play football. The recent study I showed you the other day said they tested players, gave them a depression test, and 2 concussions or more upped the percentage of concussions significantly.
Mm-hmm.
So when I saw the video of Joe Burrow, I saw depression. And I might be wrong. He could be going through 1,000 things we don't know about, but I saw someone that look in his eye I've seen before, you've seen it before in players with head injuries. And I'm worried about him in that way because he almost seemed in despair for a
Mm-hmm.
little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And he didn't know what he was going to do. And, they were pressing him and he felt so uncomfortable answering these questions, but he was trying to be honest. So I'm speculating, and maybe it's something totally different. But to be hit that many times and knocked down that many times, I'm just putting two and two together, and it may not be four, it may be something else. But I know that concussions are cumulative, and there's no such thing as a small one, right?
Right. Well, and even if you think about what we saw in his interview is just illustrative of what other people go through. If we
Yeah.
speculate about what any high performance oriented person goes through, whether they're an athlete or a professional, an entertainer, performer, we go through seasons of life, and sometimes everything seems to be going well for us, and then other times it seems like everything's going wrong. But those are the extremes, and usually life lives somewhere between those extremes. But what we've seen many times is that when people have had repetitive traumatic brain injuries, it just gets hard to do the mental work that's required to look for the silver lining in things.
Yes.
We like to talk about anti-fragility, right? So anti-fragility is going beyond resilience. It's when you're made stronger by adversity. It's when suffering makes you into a better person. We all have to go through adversities and suffering in life. How do we come out of that stronger, better, more resilient, or anti-fragile, right? But it takes a lot of abstraction to be able to look at a difficult situation and see how there's victory in it.
Yes.
And it really takes a highly intact frontal lobes to be able to use your imagination and to see the connections that other people can't see, so that you can find that silver lining that can continue to motivate you to move forward in life. And just that kind of look, the searching look in his face. You and I have seen this so many times with high performers that we've taken care of who come in and
NFL players we've treated, yes.
they just they can't see any good in anything, and then we get them into our treatment program, and suddenly brain turns on. That brain failure gets cleared up, and the lights turn on, the colors come back to life, and they can start to have some joy again.
Yeah.
I think it's an interesting case for people out there. I also thought it was interesting to see how the news media responded to him. The interviewers on site were really trying to probe, saying like, well, you know, what was a turning point for you? When did things start to go wrong? And he really couldn't give an answer to that, or declined to give an answer.
They were looking for him to criticize the team, and he wouldn't. That's what they do. And I think he made it clear it wasn't the team. He doesn't like losing. I mean, he's been a winner his whole life. He won the national championship, and but it was more than that, in my opinion, because he's lost games before. And but yes, the depression is often one of the first symptoms we see in high performance people, and they don't know why. And they would deny they're depressed. They just say, I'm just in a funk or something like that. I mean, high performance people aren't complainers usually. You know, they're problem solvers.
Yeah. Well, think how that cascades into other areas of life, and then the damage it can do.
Yes.
You know, let's say a formerly cheerful, upbeat, optimistic person now has been banged and battered and bruised, and the brain is just not working as well as it should. How does that impact your relationship with, let's say, your girlfriend, or with your close loved ones, family members, siblings, parents? That might start to be seen as a negative attitude rather than the effects of brain injury. And then, you know, well, what do many men do when they're accused of having a negative attitude? Is they'll just stop talking about it and close up, right?
Right.
Because they don't feel like they can be listened to. So
I think since the whole concussion thing, 8 years ago, whenever that kind of broke loose as a scandal, it's kind of not cool to talk about concussion now in terms of pro football. It's a big business, and I'm not saying they don't care about their players. They've made some great changes in the game to protect their players, but they still get hurt. They still get concussed, and it's just part of the game. But it doesn't mean that it's good. You know, when someone gets hurt that many times, hit so many times, who's protecting them? They got to protect themselves from themselves sometimes, because these guys want to play.
Yeah.
There's another quarterback for the New York Giants who's a rookie, and he's having a great year, but he runs and gets hit, and they tell him, go down, go down. He says, that's not who I am. He's going to learn the hard way, you know, and these guys are learning to not take these hits anymore, because it's going to shorten their career. And anyway, I don't want to get all off into that, but I was worried about him, and I hope he gets checked out and make sure he's okay.
Yeah, I hope so too. Hopefully he's got a good care team around him. I could just say from my personal experience taking care of players like him, it's been a very gratifying thing to see just how much the brain can heal in one of these pro athletes. They do have an amazing resilience, and it's probably why they get as far as they do in the first place, right?
Yes.
I mean, they have to get through a lot of gauntlet filter kind of roughness that's hard on their bodies and their brains to begin with. So they probably have some built-in recuperative mechanisms that are better than average.
Well, the training they go through, they're supermen. I mean, they are really so much far above anybody else in their conditioning and their strength and their speed. They have to be to survive. And so, yes, I think that does make them resilient.
When they do get into the right kind of treatment program, they can actually get quite a bit better faster than many other people do. So
that's so good to see.
Yeah. There should be hope there, and we just want to encourage our audience to think about brain failure. Sounds so catastrophic, but the great news is that there's a lot that can be done to help brain to get better, to get healthier, so that people can live in a more enjoyable and fulfilling life. And that's what we like to lead with. So
we're biased because we see the data, the long-term data, and overall they don't do well as a group, and so we're trying to protect them, and awareness and talking about this. Hopefully, it'll bring some people a finer point on this to looking at him. Maybe he's not, maybe he's fine. I pray that he is, but
that'd be great.
I'm worried.
Well, I think what we can do is kind of keep a finger on the pulse of both of these cases,
Yes.
Reiner and Joe Burrow, and see where things go over the next couple of weeks as they lay out. But what we would really love is for our viewers to comment about their experience. Please, in the comments below, describe for us, have you experienced any challenges to your brain health? Do you disagree with us? Are we wrong here?
Or questions. Questions you'd like us to
Questions,
answer.
sure. Yeah, definitely. And it would really help out our channel if you like and subscribe. We're still relatively new at this concept. We're really trying to get the word out there about how the brain can recover if it's treated properly. So we thank our audience very much and look forward to your questions and comments. All right.
Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas, everybody. Happy New Year. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Dr. Orr.
Thanks, Dr. Edwards.